Welcome back, everybody. This is going to be part two of the top 10 archaeological finds of the Old Testament being represented in Dr. David Graves' book, The Archaeology of the Old Testament. And he's going to be with us today to discuss a number of these artifacts. When we add them all together, we're going to have the top 10. But we couldn't get them all in part one. We tried, but it's going to need a part two. But we're going to do a heck of a job. And we're glad that he's with us.
Welcome to the journey of an archaeological exploration into the depths of the Bible. In this video, we will explore the book Archaeology and the Old Testament by Dr. Graves, which seeks to bring clarity to the Bible's many discoveries and provide readers with a deeper understanding of its stories and teachings. He has excavated in the Middle East, in Jordan and Israel for over 15 years. Thousands of artifacts have been discovered that relate to the Bible, but few of them make the news headlines. Revisionist scholars often seek to undermine and downplay the relevance of many of the discoveries. In his book, experienced archaeologist Dr. Graves has assembled a helpful collection of over 115 significant up-to-date discoveries from the Old Testament period. In his book, he begins with an introduction to Old Testament archaeology, discussing dating and the role of archaeology in biblical studies, and then examines the relationship between archaeology and the Old Testament text, where he examines their languages and the importance of the Dead Sea Scrolls. He tours sites and discusses artifacts associated with Genesis, including the creation and flood epics, such as the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Atrahasis epic, among others. He presents the most recent archaeological evidence of Israel's stay in Egypt and the Exodus, the evidence of Joshua's stay at Abel Shittim, the modern site of Tal el Hammam, then the conquest of Jericho and Ai. Next, the period of Samuel, King Solomon, King David, and Chronicles. He explores the new excavations at Shiloh and discoveries of many seals found in Jerusalem with important biblical names. The period of the Old Testament prophets. Nabonidus cylinders and Babylonian chronicles. Ezra and Nehemiah, including the Cyrus cylinder. This all includes the many important sites in the Old Testament, showing the significant influence of local references, society, architecture, and religion on the peoples of the Old Testament that confirms the historical reliability of the Old Testament biblical events and shed light on the text. Dr. Graves explores the full range of important Old Testament archaeological discoveries, from manuscripts, pottery, inscriptions, seals, and other artifacts. This insightful book will illustrate archaeological finds with more than 165 pertinent color photographs, detailed maps, and carefully crafted charts. Included in the book is a glossary defining technical archaeological terms, and the book also includes extensive footnotes and a carefully researched bibliography for future study. For your convenience, there is also a helpful subject index. Join us as we uncover the secrets of the Old Testament and gain a greater appreciation of its history, societies, and cultures. This accessible resource, intended for laypeople who want to know more about archaeology and the Old Testament, is suitable whether you are in a seminary course, a college student, doing a church group, or just for your own personal study. All our books are listed on our website smyrnaean.blogspot.com and can be found on amazon.com. Thank you for watching.
Okay, folks, welcome back. My name is Dr. George Sparks, and this is Biblical Archaeology from the Ground Down. I have with us today Dr. David Graves from Aberdeen University from Scotland, where he received his PhD. And we're going to start with a discussion of, I believe you said, the Cyrus cylinder.
My number 8 choice would be the Cyrus cylinder. This is an important artifact that was discovered in the Temple of Marduk in 1879 by Hormuz Rassam. Why it's so important is because it's direct evidence of Cyrus's return of the Jewish people after their Babylonian captivity, mentioned in Ezra number 1, chapter 1. It's now in the British Museum. But it's important because we have a description of what was taking place in around 540 BC. 539 was the fall of Babylon. And then we have Nehemiah's work in Jerusalem, and Ezra's work in Jerusalem in about 545, 558. And so that whole period of history of the Persian Empire is recorded on a tablet that's now in the British Museum. It was written in Old Persian, Elamite, and Akkadian. And it says, I, Cyrus the king, and it mentions, of course, the return of Israel being allowed to go back to their land and to rebuild the temple and the walls of Jerusalem. Encourage them to return to their homes and worship their own gods. It's very, very significant. The tablet itself, which is a cylinder, so it's a round cylinder, I return images of the gods to the sacred center, the Tigris, whose sanctuaries had been abandoned for a long time. And I let them dwell in the eternal abodes. I gathered all their inhabitants and returned their dwellings. So we have the return of the Israelites to their homeland in Jerusalem and to Israel. What people may not also realize is that this was not the only country that he did this for.
That's correct. Yes.
Did that to all of the peoples that they had taken captive. So it was a repatriation of their lands, which is quite significant. Now, closely related to that is Nabonidus' cylinder. That was discovered in 1879 by Rassam, same individual. It's in the British Museum. It mentions Nabonidus' residence at Tyna during the fall of Babylon and the capture of Nabonidus by Cyrus of Persia. So these all relate to biblical characters and biblical events from the time period that we have in extra biblical records. So here we have the archaeology that coincides and connects with the Bible.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to the Cyrus cylinder just for a second.
Yes.
Because it did not mention Yahweh, it did not mention Judea, it did not mention Jerusalem, but
Yes.
it just gave an edict that the people can return home, and that in itself was seen as an epic that the Jews could be returned to the homeland, because the God of those that returned to Judea, it was the God Yahweh that put this thought into Cyrus's head. Let the people go home. Let my people go. Except it's going from the south to north. Now they're going from the north to south.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
A correlation with the Bible and the history of the time. So we can tell that it correlates and it tells what the Bible's saying.
Exactly. And then we also have the Nabonidus cylinder that you just spoke about. Now, which would be oldest? Nabonidus? That would be older, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it's 555 to about 540 BC.
Right.
And the cylinder, Cyrus's cylinder, is about 539 to 538 BC when it was recorded, the history there. So,
okay. Now, Nabonidus is important to the scriptures, and it's relevant in the book of Daniel. Don't we have, he's not actually mentioned, he's the missing element, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. Nabonidus was Belshazzar's father.
Yes.
And Belshazzar was the Babylonian king of Daniel, mentioned in Daniel 5. And for a long time, critics had claimed that Belshazzar was a made-up fictional character until the cylinder came around and we found his name listed on it. And they basically were eating crow, as we say.
Well, it's interesting because I believe that it's been a while since I don't get Daniel out every day and read Daniel, sorry. But I believe it said in that edict that Daniel gets to be third in the kingdom. Part of the question was, if you got the king and then you got Daniel, how come Daniel wasn't second? That's because the true ruler was an absentee landlord. And when we found his cylinder, now we say, oh, that was the missing element that was not mentioned in Daniel. So
That's
we
right.
have the king, what would it be? The king's son. And now that makes Daniel 3. So he gets to be third in the kingdom.
Yes.
All
What
right. I just wanted to,
archaeology does is it helps us to better understand the text. It doesn't prove the Bible true. It just helps us to better understand what's being said in the text. And here we have a perfect example of that. We have the name of Belshazzar, the king of Babylon, and explaining the idea of the second in command mentioned in Daniel 5:29. So good point.
all right. I just wanted to interject that, make it a little bit more interesting for the listening audience there.
The other thing I wanted to mention about Nabonidus' cylinders is that there are at least 4 of them, just one of them. The biblical text says we need to have 2 or more witnesses. Well, we have 4 tablets now that say the same thing, and they're different shapes and sizes. And let's see, one of them is in the British Museum. There's a number, actually, there's 4 in the British Museum. And I've got photographs in my book of most of those. And they all list all of the documentation where you can find them and what their numbers were. Okay, so now we move on to our last. Number 9 is, I've got on here, the Black Obelisk. Now, this is a really intriguing artifact. It was discovered by Sir Austin Henry Layard in 1846. And he discovered that in the Babylonian city, or in the Akkadian Empire of Nimrod. And what's interesting about this one is that we have a large obelisk. All 4 sides have panels on them with representations of what's going on in Shalmaneser III's empire at the time. And it depicts the earliest surviving image of an Israelite king, King Jehu. King Jehu. And this comes to the time period of King Jehu, which is probably about 841 BC is when the obelisk is dated to. 841 to 814 is when Jehu reigned. And the Black Obelisk was excavated. The thing stands about 6 feet high. You can't miss it. It's black. And we have all these beautiful paintings of animals. There's tigers and lions and rhinoceroses. But King Jehu is pictured bringing tribute to King Shalmaneser III in 841 BC. It's the earliest surviving picture of an Israelite king. So you can take your photograph, your wallet out, and you can actually show the picture of an Israelite king, which is really interesting, I think. So we get to see what they look like.
Now, how would you like to be remembered like Jehu? Your picture is bowing down to a king to be remembered for centuries and centuries. There I am, like this at the foot of another king. That'd be kind of rough.
And the text above it says, "The tribute of Jehu, son of Omri, I received from him silver, gold, golden bowl, a golden vase, a golden goblet, a golden picture, tin, a staff for a king, and javelin." So basically, he's bringing gifts to this Shalmaneser III, saying, "I'm going to give you all this stuff. Spare my life."
Right. Now, Jehu, he was the king of Israel because of his coup against Ahab and Ahab's children. And that's a very unique, I think it's recorded in 2 Kings and 2 Chronicles. And you got to read them both together, one 2 Kings and then read 2 Chronicles to get the whole story. Like Paul Harvey used to say, to get the rest of the story, you got to read really both of them. And it's a little confusing because they use different names, a little bit different names for these individuals in the biblical text. Was Jehu actually the son of a king from Judea? Was he from the family of Omri?
He was the son of Omri.
Okay.
So he's the Omridian dynasty.
Okay. Then, of course, that's up north. Omri. And then you have Ahab and Jezebel. Now, people are going to say, oh, Ahab and Jezebel. Now we're clicking, right? And then there was Jehu that established the coup I believe he chased Ahab's, was it Ahab's son, and killed one, but he definitely killed.
The dynasty is Omri, Ahab, Ahaziah, Jeroboam, and then Jehu. So that's the lineage there, and all those dates. But the other thing to remember is that at the same time, Elijah and Elisha are prophets in northern Israel, in the northern kingdom of Israel. And in the south, you have, at the same time period, Jehoash, who was king in Judah, in the southern kingdom. Again, people would just need to read all this stuff out. In my book, I have a timeline that I lay this all out with all of the different things. So it's helpful to kind of use it to follow along in your Bible if you wanted to read the accounts.
Right. Now, Jehu followed Jezebel to Jezreel and have her thrown from the balcony, right?
Yeah.
That was him. Okay. And you know what? Just as a side note, don't they, or there was a discovery of possibly Jezebel's signet ring? Was that found?
Yes, I believe, but the name is somewhat confusing on it. So I can't say with certainty that it was Jezebel's ring.
We can't say. That's, you know what? I know better to actually say that's sensationalism there. I walked right into my own sensationalism. They found Jezebel's ring, but that's right. It doesn't say, I, Jezebel, daughter of so-and-so, wife of so-and-so. That would be concrete. Yeah, they found a very unique seal ring. I think it was actually a front cover of a BAR, Biblical Archaeological Review, years ago. Yes. But everybody look it up. Just look up Jezebel seal ring and get more information on that. But I just thought you'd like to bring that up because we have Jehu and Jezebel and Ahab. It gets really complicated. And that's who we're talking about. And Jehu is recognized, as bowing down in servitude, bringing tribute to a king, another king. That's one way to go down in history, right?
Yeah.
What the heck? A heck of a family photo there. Okay, just wanted to interject that.
Perhaps related to this as well is that we have an inscription with the name of Goliath on it from the town of Goliath. But again, we can't say with certainty that it was Goliath. But what's interesting is that we have a name used from the same time period.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to keep those things in mind. Now, my 10th and final discovery are items found in the city of Lachish or Lachish. Tomato.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Sometimes they pronounce it more in a Hebrew way, but what we have here is we have a city in Israel. It's just probably southwest of Jerusalem, not far actually from where they're fighting right now with Hamas, with Gaza, and our hearts go out to everyone in Israel right now and their loss, and pray for the people there. But the city of Lachish or Lachish was excavated, and it's a key city. And during the excavations, they found the gates, and in one of the city gates, they found the Lachish letters.
Yes, no.
The rampart and the city walls have been excavated. There's some great reproductions that you can find online. They've also found a 6-chambered gate, and in that gate, what was really an interesting find was they found a toilet. And the Lachish Gate Shrine, the stone toilet was found in the rear room of the sanctuary. They removed the toilet. But what's interesting is that in Scripture, we have, and they they break down or demolish the image of Baal and break down the house of Baal and make it a damaged, a draught house or a latrine until this day.
What?
So basically, they turn it into a toilet, and they find the toilet.
That is pretty neat, though. That's being pretty accurate to find, um, because a toilet back in what we're talking about is almost like a big stone with the center carved out of it.
Yes, and that's what
Like
they discovered. Yeah, and it wasn't used, so it was symbolic. And we find this recorded in 2 Kings 10:27. So they demolish the image of Baal and they turn it into a toilet. But they also
find the toilet, what, 1,300 years later, more than that, 1,700 years later.
Yeah,
that's pretty. Now you're talking about also. I didn't know if you're going to stay with the latrine or talk about the Lachish letters.
No, we're moving on to the letters because that's where they found the letters as well.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So these were discovered by a guy by the name of James Starkey. The toilet was found actually a few years ago, just a couple of years ago in excavations there. And there's photographs out if online if you wanted to find it. But the Lachish letters were important because they give the account of Judah's first days before the Babylonian invasion in 587, 586 BC. A prophet is named who may have been the prophet Jeremiah, although his name is not mentioned. So they record events that are found in Scripture from that time period and give us the account of the final days in 586. 587 BC. And they're in the British Museum, and there's been a number of them found. And they're on what we call ostraca, which are broken pieces of pottery on which they would write a letter or a note. And so somebody's quickly, frantically, probably jotting down some letter to record what happened in the events. And they uncovered these and discovered them near the gate. And then, of course, correlating and related to this is the Lachish reliefs. Now, these are in the British Museum now. These are large panels that line the hallways in the British Museum now. They're probably about 6 feet high, and they have the carvings of the actual battle, and the booty of Lachish passes before the king, and Judeans that are skinned alive. And the Assyrian camp is described, and the battle is described, all in relief on this panel. So we can see in pictures what's taking place. The Judean prisoners are being carried back. The king of Sennacherib of Assyria taking back the prisoners. The Judean officials flailed alive. The picture of that on the reliefs, on how they treated them. We can just think back to what happened this past week, and we see that.
Isn't that true? Wow.
Human life, the human heart.
Yep. So
we need a savior.
We got two different periods. Lachish letters are Babylonian siege, and the scenery of the siege. Isn't that the Assyrians?
Yes.
So we got one is probably like late 8th century. Would it be around 701? And the other one is
the Lachish letters would date to about 588, 589.
There we go.
And we have
to clear that up. So
the Assyrian reliefs are from 701 BC.
Yes.
Yeah. So
they're extremely brutal. Extremely brutal. It's amazing scenery, but you're going to see the ramp, those that were defending the city on the wall, and those that are leaving the city, those that are taken captive. You see the tortured,
flaming arrows.
Yeah. And then the Lachish letters from the Babylonian period. to me, that's interesting because it talks about, can you see the signal fires of Azekah? And they said, no, we can't see it. That means that city fell and you're next. And really, when we think about archaeology, and we're almost out of time here, is that it's not just getting a shovel in a brush and dig, 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 and hopefully you find something really cool, something biblical, like that can be represented in the Bible. But also, when you're there, try to have empathy and feel what these people feel. Their emotions. They're trying to protect their city, their families, their children, and they know that they're next and the enemy is coming and the enemy is going to be brutal, and if they defend the city, they can be thirsty, they could be hungry. And then when you excavate, you're going to find the throwing stones, you're going to find the bronze arrowheads, and you're going to find skeletons.
Yes.
And I think they did find a cave where a lot of skeletons were found. I guess after they tortured them, they threw a lot of bodies in the cave. And this was from the Assyrian period. I believe that's a text that I read years ago.
I'm writing a new book, George, called The History of Biblical Archaeology. So I'm going to be looking at all of the people who did the excavations, not just the artifacts that are discovered. And so I'm presently working on this book. I hope to have it done in maybe 6 months to a year, but maybe sooner than that. I'm making some pretty good progress right now on it, but it's going to be the history. And we're going to tell the story of the archaeologists themselves, because there's a lot of fascinating, interesting stories, romance, and yeah. So we're going to have it'll be an interesting read, a fun read.
So you're going to get done with your book. This might not be appropriate, but I'll say you're going to get done with your book. It's going to have the romance and the adventure and the fighting and the drama. It's going to be the next Harry Potter. No, I didn't mean just like in sales, okay. And it's like, did you hear about this? Did you hear what that Elijah guy did? But we are out of time again. Always great to have you. Learn a lot in a short amount of time that we have, but we're going to have to close out. My name is Dr. George Sparks. Almost didn't know my name. I have with me Dr. David Graves, PhD. Doctor, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. And we'll have you again soon.
Always fun. Thanks, George.
Thank you.